Okay, welcome to Into the Channel podcast, primarily about women's football. Before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy this show or love women's football as much as we do, come kick it with us already. Subscribe, follow YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to watch or listen. Leave us a review over your favorite podcast app. Links to all of our socials in the show notes of this episode. Special guest rejoining the ITC today. But first, I am your host, Dino DeCespedes. And as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel. What is up, man?
I'm feeling fantastic, buddy. I'm feeling rested. We've had a few days in between shows. It's about time we got a break. Obviously, I'm guessing some of the footballers out there in the Olympics are probably happy that they got a break. But part of the reason why I'm feeling fantastic, of course, as you mentioned, we are joined by the founder and host of Busy Watching Women's Soccer. She's making her second appearance on the show. She is, hopefully she accepts the role, the Director of Tactics and Strategy for the Into the Channel podcast. Please welcome once again, Bridie O'Toole.
Thank you. That is a great title. I will gladly take it.
Yes.
Let's go. Team USA. Back
in business.
As Grant mentioned, what a whirlwind that tournament was. No rest here kind of podcast. Very much a rest podcast. Definitely excited to get into it. Grant, I'll kick it to you. Where should we get started?
Well, first, I almost forgot. See, maybe there was a little rust involved. I almost forgot
you're right.
The cracking of the celebratory beer. So I'm going to do this on my side. We're just going to enjoy over here.
Same.
Look at that. Just a great team over here. The symmetry. Okay, so with that out of the way, I want to start with a question that I have to think has been on everyone's mind since the closing ceremony. I'm going to frame this in the most normal way I can. Okay, Bridie, let's say a time traveler came to you from the year 2424, 400 years in the future.
Okay.
And in this scenario, we're pretending the Earth hasn't been burnt to a crisp from big oil and other mega corporations ruining the planet in the name of record profits. I digress. This traveler comes to you and asks, how did the U.S. women's national team manage to win the gold medal in the 2024 Olympics after such a disappointing 2023 World Cup? If you had to pinpoint it, what aspect of their play would you point to first?
Top of mind for me absolutely is adaptability. And it wasn't just, can we do different things? It was, can we really execute in different looks and execute different styles of football across opponents? And that was, I think, just my favorite thing to watch was how structured the team was against certain opponents, how free playing they were against certain opponents. And they just really looked like a team that could do it all, which was amazing with Hayes being there such a short time. It was really impressive.
Yeah, definitely got a hint of that. I mean, I think one thing that we'll remember is kind of like the triple espresso nature of this tournament. But in reality, you look at those three knockout stage matches. Obviously, the U.S. 6 up, 6 down, 6 wins. Didn't feel like that. I think there was some nerving moments there throughout. But the three knockout stage matches, 1-0, 1-0, 1-0. Alyssa Nair, standout football, 2 goals allowed. Naomi Gurma, a huge part of that. That backline, a huge part of that. What do you think the U.S. was able to do defensively to kind of like impose their will and make sure that these games played out in a very 1-0 kind of way?
Yeah, they looked really composed, really confident, which is great for defenders, but they just really managed their, not even the defensive third, but just their half of the pitch. They were just so dominant, and you can just see them all defensively working, all understanding what their defensive roles are. And I think the main thing for me is just, letting individual stars be stars. Naomi Gurma has a great read on things. She knows when to step. She knows when to backtrack. And especially the Brazil game, I think that was one where you really saw people go kind of one-on-one defensively a little bit more. And you just saw great moments from Dunn. You saw great moments from Davidson. And I mean, just let them loose. Let them do their thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. You had a great video on your Patreon, which everybody should go seek out and subscribe to. By the way, we'll have a link to that in the description of this show. I think you had a couple moments from the match just kind of pointing out Davidson's physicality in that Brazil matchup. She was clearly still a little dinged. I think they took her off in like the 60th or the 70th maybe in the final. Were you surprised at all that she was kind of able to still do that, like based on her history? Or did you expect USA to kind of have a physical game plan going into the match?
Not at all, actually. I mean, in hindsight, everything makes sense. And I think about Emma Hayes and I think about how well prepared she is. And it goes, well, yeah, of course. She watched Brazil play an incredibly physical game against Spain and she had her team incredibly well prepared. And I think I've said it before, but typically in football, you fight fire with fire. So that often seems to be her approach. But even if you think, okay, the coach might be going in with that approach. That's just not what we've seen from a team before. It's just not what we've seen them execute. Davidson, I was really impressed by, because I do think you could see a little bit of the discomfort there, especially as time went on. And it was just a willingness to just battle through it. It's like getting into the cliches, but it's like, who wants it more? Who's willing to fight more? Who's willing to tough it out? And they all were.
Absolutely. We talked a lot on this show. I'm glad you brought up that Davidson sub, Grant, because Sonnet comes on for Davidson, and we were just kind of gushing over the Sonnet minutes in this tournament. Not the flashiest player, but the perfect player to kind of step into multiple roles and even kind of elevate, like a Tierna Davidson, her last 10, 15 minutes of the match. Going from that, obviously a great player, dinged up, like you mentioned, to a fresh Sonnet was just such a breath of fresh air. And then obviously the way that those games unfolded in a very defensive way, what a huge piece to have on there. Did you notice anything tactically that the U.S. was doing defensively to kind of cover some things up above and beyond, like imposing a physical nature on the match?
I think the one thing I saw was a big shift to cover the right wing where Ludmilla was. They were just really getting burned with the speed. And I think Brazil was they were moving balls so fast, so far, so quickly that if you weren't cutting it off at the source, you were going to have a problem later on. So I really liked that they kind of played defense higher up the pitch. I think they did a really good job at that all tournament, but especially against Brazil. I mean, they made adjustments quickly. At the 30-minute cooling break, they did a lot, I think, to shift people over and give the midfielders a bit more freedom to cover in the wide areas.
Nobody hydrates like the USA.
That's how we do it. A big hydration team over here. So let's work our way forward up the pitch, because you talk about defending a little higher up the pitch. I want to talk about the midfield a little bit. Dino had a great framing of it in our last episode where he kind of talked about, all right, so USA wins the gold medal, but questions remain in the midfield in terms of who are you going to play there? What kind of style is that midfield going to play? Like, are they more connectors? Are they more kind of hang back double sixes? Like, how is this thing going to look in the midfield? And I realize I'm saying this after the team wins the gold medal. What needs to change moving forward? What might the ideal rotation look like? And just frankly, do we know anything about the midfield as it stands right here on August 18th, 2024? I
know no secrets, but my gut instinct is they want to use the midfield more. One of the trends I kind of saw over the games is, and this seems like Hayes, I don't know all the background of her Chelsea days, but she seems like she does really like those wide channels. She's very happy to go double width if she needs to, and, happy to do the big crosses into the box if she needs to. But at some point, you do want to dominate that midfield, and you do want to be able to unlock things through the midfield. And tempo control, I think, is a huge thing that's missing right now. Naomi Girma is doing so much of that from a base of the structure, deciding, when are we connecting with single passes? When are we going to try and break lines? And I would imagine that you want to move some of that decision-making into the midfield. So I think that's probably going to be a really big thing for them over the next year, is trying to shore up how can they control the tempo of the game from a midfield more.
That makes a lot of sense. Bridie, what was your take on how Lindsey Horan played in this tournament?
We all have like personal bias, and I think maybe sometimes I have a little bit of bias towards Lindsey Horan because I just really like that style of play where she unlocks things really quickly, a lot of one-touch play. But I do think we could see that there's an area of the pitch that she's much more comfortable in. She wants to stay central. She wants to stay pretty high up. And I think sometimes when she wasn't in those positions, she just looked a little uncomfortable. My general feel with her is that she's always kind of 2 or 3 steps ahead of teammates. And then by being so far ahead of them, it kind of ends up making her look like she's far behind them. Because if somebody doesn't catch up to you, then you got to go to your second or your third decision. So I don't know. I think it's just a case of can we be consistent and get somebody where they're comfortable, or do we have to start looking at some other rotations maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a question worth asking. I think Lindsey Horan, she might be exactly 30 years old as things stand right now. So, I mean, she's not going to play forever, but it's not like she's well past her prime. I think, it's fair to say in football, you hit 30 years old, you do kind of usually start to hit some kind of descent at that point. her midfield partners for a big chunk of this tournament. She had Sam Coffey until Sam Coffey had the yellow card accumulation, and she had Rose Lavelle, who I think on paper, and Dino knows, and I think you probably know by now, Bridie, I do sometimes get caught up at looking at these things on paper. Coffey and Lavelle with Horan feels like a natural fit. And I thought it looked like it in some stretches, but it was a lot of Emily Fox to Rodman. It was a lot of Germa passing way up top. What did you come away with thinking about that combination of Coffey and Lavelle in the midfield with Horan?
It just doesn't feel like it's quite 100% clicking. It feels like we have the pieces to get the job done. And, it's hard putting together a complete team. So you do have to accept that there's going to be, maybe some things that are a little less than perfect. But just the chemistry in terms of working as a complete unit, as a kind of group of three, I don't feel that's quite there. I feel like you're always seeing somebody at the bottom of the structure kind of repositioning people, especially when people are playing with their backs turned. It seems like there's kind of a lack of understanding of how to, once you pass the ball, move and help continue things progressing up the pitch. So it's a tough one. It's a weird one where I think I preferred Coffey over a tournament from Lavelle. I'm not sure Lavelle really got to do her thing as much, but Coffey definitely did get to do her style of football.
Yeah, definitely big time play from Sam Coffey. I feel like I want to change the tenor a little bit of the pod because it sounds a little somber. And then I remember that we won the gold medal and that the USA is back on top. Bridie, who do you think raised their stock the most over the course of this tournament?
Oh, that's a great question. It's really, for me, it's between Swanson and Rodman, because I think when you look at their club play, which is very good, and you look at their international play, you say, wow, this person came out and performed a lot better than I see them on an average game day. And I don't want to punish anybody else for being so excellent throughout normal course of business that they just come and do, like Germa always looks great. But I think in terms of, showing a difference and showing that you can step up, Rodman and Swanson really, really came through.
In a lot of ways, it felt like Rodman's tournament. Like she was just a menace down the right-hand side. She had some moments where she was switching over to the left just to cause chaos from over there. She looked faster than almost every opponent she was out there with. She looked stronger. She looked more clever. She does that Trin spin where she just gets it. And it feels like it works every single time, where she just draws the defender to the touchline and then she just spins around them. And nobody ever sees it coming. And I don't blame them, because they're probably just freaked out trying to guard her.
Yeah, it's not an area of the pitch. She does it a lot. I feel like kind of that halfway line on the wing, and she pulls people in. And it's not an area where you're kind of worried about giving up space. So I am amazed. I know people are watching the film. I know they see it, and somehow she still seems to get someone every time.
Yeah, she kind of lures you in. I love Rodman as an answer because, I think in my mind, she still has a little bit of that top U.S. prospect kind of brand to her. And then in long stretches of multiple matches, we're just like, oh, she's just dominating this game. End line to end line, defensively, just physically, like Grant mentioned. And then on the ball, I thought she was really great. And a great kind of like counterpunch. I thought Smith and Swanson had really good chemistry on the left-hand side and kind of like overlapping with each other and kind of seeing each other. And then once it came back this way, it was Rodman and Fox, and then Horan kind of would get involved. And it was just a completely different look offensively. I don't know that the U.S. was able to cash in, I think, as much as we would have liked, but I think the threat was there. Grant and I were talking about this a little bit earlier today. I think the U.S., for as much, ballyhoo as there was around, short rests, short rosters, I thought the U.S. had a massive advantage when you look at strength and conditioning and how deep the roster is, right? So of all 12 teams, it kind of felt like those conditions serve the U.S. the best. Now, in a more traditional tournament, like a World Cup style, do you think that we would visibly see less distance between the U.S. and like the next, crop of teams there? Would you expect a more competitive tournament? How much of what the U.S. was able to do you chalk up to their depth and, like I mentioned, the strength and conditioning?
I think probably a decent amount, because Hayes just coming in, you have 4 games or 6 games to prepare or something. Like, you're not going to completely change a team in that time. So you're working with a very, very good foundation. And we know, historically, Americans have had significantly better strength and conditioning. You can still see it to this day. So I think it was definitely a part of it. I think confidence is the other thing. A short tournament, when things start going well, you're just building on momentum. So it is probably something that they benefited from. And I think the depth as well is just, when you're taking out Swanson and putting in a Lynn Williams. I mean, like where are you getting relief as the opposition? You're not at all.
Yeah, totally. I think that really carried a lot. I mean, we talked about, you take out Davidson, you put in Sonnet. You take out Dunn, you put in Neiswanger. Or you might make another sub, and then you're moving Dunn up forward, and every team is like, oh my goodness, now a brand new set of problems, new set of geometry that we kind of have to compete with.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to play one of me and Dino's favorite games in just all of sports, previously known as, in the other sports that we used to watch, previously known as Let's Name Some Dudes. We have now renamed it, rebranded it to Let's Name Some Players. Let's name some players here. So we talk about this midfield, and we kind of talk about the general rotation and kind of what's next if we're looking into the future. We talk about Haran at 30 years old. You have to start looking at some plans. Well, we talked about it during the last episode as well. Jaden Shaw is going to continue to develop and come into her own, and she is somebody you can fit into that midfield. We have mentioned at great lengths, and I'll stop after this player, we have mentioned at great lengths the addition that 17-year-old Lily Johannes would bring to this roster. I think we might go from a point where this midfield, we're kind of looking at like, okay, what are we going to do, to, oh, wow, we have a lot of midfield players available in the pool. How are we going to get all of them involved? So my question here, Bridie, my very long way of asking this question is, I think the midfield is going to get crowded. Who are the players who you think are going to kind of come knocking on the door for Emma Hayes to really consider, and maybe in some cases have to get on the roster in the midfield?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to see more of Bethune and Hirschfeld. I think there's no way that they're in their training for that and don't continue to come back. We've barely seen both of them, and we know they're very capable players. There's also just so much young talent in the NWSL right now, and I think, now is going to be the time for experimentation. Hopefully Hayes brings in a bunch of players and just tries to see what she's got. I really like Claire Hutton over at Kansas City, great young player. I like Kennedy Fuller at Angel City. I think she's got some interesting ability. So, there's a lot of different styles of midfielders out there right now, especially kind of in that sort of like 17, 18, 19 age range. But if you're looking at them now, they could be a starter by the time you get to a World Cup.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, the NWSL just absolutely chock full of young American talent. Olivia Moultrie from Portland Thorns, 18 years old now, was playing in the NWSL at 15 years old. I think she might still have the record for back in 2021 when she appeared at 15 to be the youngest player to play in the league. The pool is big. Dino, who comes to your mind when you think about like who might be able to crack this midfield?
I mean, it's interesting because I think I would still probably put Corbin Albert, 20 years old, kind of in that same pool, where I think there's still some room for growth there. Bridie, I want to get your take on Albert's play on the field, because I think we saw some nice moments, saw some really shaky moments, and a lot in between. When you zoom out and look at her tournament, what was your take on Albert's play on the field?
I think she had a great tournament. I think when it really mattered, she stepped up and she did what was required. I think the shakiness looked very normal to me for a young player with a lot of people watching them, and she would just look like she took a little bit of time to settle. But I mean, she just looked really comfortable once she was able to do her thing, which is, okay, I want to counter press. I want to just distribute balls quickly. The one thing that maybe two things. My one thing that I've kind of been harping on for a while with her is the header. She's just not getting up in the air and a little bit hesitant to do it, but I have seen some improvement there, a little bit more fight. And then the other thing sometimes is you'll see the defenders needing to position her a little bit when she's playing more of that defensive mid role. And it's that same thing with your back turned, making sure you're creating the right angles to open things up for people. But the part of her game that she's, comfortable with, the opening up the attack with the through balls, the quick play, the quick decision making, shot from outside the box, like that just looked so developed and so ready to go.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You see some of that. We saw some of that at PSG in the Champions League as well. She kind of came on a little late. I think she had one Champions League goal. She didn't get a ton of burn like in the group stage, if I remember correctly. Or maybe she got some during the end of the group stage, just off the top of my head. And I mean, in that role, kind of like your forward running, attacking type midfielder, she's just going to have a lot of company in there to compete with. I mean, and we have not even mentioned the number one pick in the 2024 NWSL draft out of North Carolina, Allie Sentnor, who's having a really nice season for Utah Royals. She can obviously, Sentnor can play a little on the wing. She can play central. I just want to in kind of thinking about this whole group coming up, Ali Sentnor is top 10 in the NWSL in assists, in total shots, and in shots on target. She's third in the league in key passes with 33, which is only 2 behind Carson Pickett and 1 behind Trinity Rodman. Not bad company to keep. She is also tied for second in shot-creating actions, tied with Croy Bethune with 66, trailing only Temwa Chawinga, who has 73. So, I mean, I realize there is a little bit of the Royals don't have a ton of talent around her, and so she is the focal point of the attack. But for somebody who is 20 years old in their first year in a professional league, I mean, that's just dynamite. And you can see it in her play. She's a dynamic type of player. I mean, I have to think Hayes and company are looking at her like, okay, this is another player. Like her and Johannes are 2 superlative players. It's like, how are we going to talk anybody out of keeping them out of the lineup?
Sentnor's coming in for sure. Those stats surprise me. Those are amazing stats, but I'm not shocked. I mean, when you see her play, she's just so individually talented, and her game IQ it's on fire. My biggest question for her is, one, when does she come in? Hopefully it's soon as part of a kind of evaluation period. And just like you mentioned, where does she come in? Because I really think she's one of these players that could kind of do it all, and it's sort of a decision as to what do you have her develop and work on next. She does look a little more complete to me as a forward, but I think a lot of the tools for the midfield are there.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and she plays real hungry too. Like, I mean, that Utah team is, they spend a lot of time trying to make up a deficit, but she's the exact type of player that's not shy about pushing forward and putting on her offense. I mean, there's going to be some real decisions for Emma Hayes to make, because obviously you can't invite everybody to camp, but yeah, tons of talent. I want to shift ahead to the forward spot. Obviously, those 3 players up front, not even unfortunately, because I think in some ways they're overshadowing like the defense a little bit, but they will be one of those things that we remember from the tournament, whether you remember the Trident or Triple Espresso or Belle Biv de Gaulle, wherever you land, no discrimination here. But what are you going to remember from the interplay between those 3 specifically, Trinity Rodman, Sophia Smith, Mallory Swanson?
I hadn't really thought about it before, but you made a really interesting point around, that left side was really a combination of Swanson and Smith. And that's really what got it done was, the quick passing between the two, the way that they would just interchange and easily overlap, underlap. They just had such great flow, chemistry. And then on the right-hand side, it doesn't take a whole lot to set Rodman up. It could be one little pass, and then she's going to run half the pitch and then shoot on her own. So I think it was really fantastic that you're offering such different things on each side of the pitch. It's a completely different thing to defend one-on-one than it is to defend quick passing sequences. And you mentioned it, if you want to throw a spanner in the works, you just move Rodman over for 5-10 minutes at a time and then bring her back. So it's just such a well-rounded front 3 to me. The fact that, probably any of them could play any position. There's so much interchangeability. Chemistry is great. It was just fantastic to watch. Like, there were very, very few moments where I wrote notes of improvement points.
Not a lot of room for great improvement there between those 3. Sophie Smith, multiple-time MVP of the NWSL, Trinity Rodman in the MVP race this year, Rookie of the Year, Mallory Swanson, absolutely incredible player in her own right. I'm curious, so you have those 3, and those 3 looked great, like Dino said. They kind of shone as the stars of the show in a lot of aspects. Let's say, and obviously we don't want to see this, but let's say one of them is unavailable, and now you only have 2 of the 3. Again, I feel like I'm talking a lot about ages here. And again, this team won the gold medal, so not a, we're picking nits here. But Lynn Williams, I want to say 33, somewhere in that ballpark, I think. Let's say Swanson is busy. Let's say by some miracle the Cubs make the World Series again, and Mallory Swanson has to go support Dansby Swanson at the World Series, and she's not available for a match. Can the front line be as effective with 2 out of those 3 instead of all 3? And who do you look at moving forward of like, okay, this is the person I would slot in there?
Yeah. My gut just tells me no. I think there's just some really magic between those 3. Like, I think it's just fantastic chemistry, but there's also, I think, like a degree of competition between them. Like, I'm happy for you to score, but now I want to go get the next one. Yeah. So I really think if you take even just one of them out, you're really messing with something good. So I'm really hoping that baseball doesn't take over here. Who would I look to? I don't know. It's a tough one. I'm so desperate to see Jaden Shaw up top in the nine. I just think she has something there. I think her one-touch ability on the volley, I just want to see more of it. I really think we haven't seen all of Jaden Shaw yet.
Tremendously interesting. I kind of get that feeling too, though, because I think she definitely has a nose for goal. She's good finding space when it gets a little crowded. And I think, Grant, to your question, it makes me think about the 23 World Cup where we had Smith, we had Rodman, but we had Morgan in that Swanson spot. And, a lot of differences between those two teams. It wasn't just that, but we saw a version of just two of the three. Bridie, I want to ask you about the U.S. scoring wise. Group stage, obviously, we saw them be a little bit more prolific. We talked at the top about how the game slowed down quite a bit in the knockout stage. You obviously get the Germany rematch where you're not going to see another 4-1 scoreline disparity. Were you troubled at all going from like more of a high-powered offense in the group stage to that more, defensive-y kind of match?
Not even remotely, because it was like a switch that they flipped at will. And that is absolute best case scenario to me. The game against Japan was fascinating to me because it almost felt like we'll score when we want to. We're not in that much of a hurry. We'd much rather make sure that we're controlling the flow of the game and we have things going our way. And, yes, of course they wanted to score, but they just seemed way more concerned about, controlling the ball, making sure they had possession, making sure Japan couldn't be doing what they wanted to do. And I just think it's wild to be able to change things up at the drop of the hat like that.
Hell yeah.
I think it really speaks to what you had said up top is that I think what other countries might be looking at here. We've talked about the strength and conditioning edge. We've talked about the development. We've talked about the elite league that the NWSL is. But your point at the top of the adaptability of the roster, and now you have Emma Hayes pulling those levers. If you're other countries looking at the USA, it's like, okay, where exactly are the weak spots here? They have the elite manager in the world, and now they have a crop of some of the elite players in the world. I love the way you frame it. You can flip the switch and be like, okay, yeah, we want to shut Brazil's water off on the right-hand side. They have the players to do that.
Yeah, it's awesome to see them just execute something special for each opponent. Brazil, especially to me, that was the most different game to what they played of all the games. I think we saw a really heavy emphasis on possession throughout all of the tournament, but the Brazil one to me was, okay, maybe we can give up on possession a little bit as long as we're controlling where the ball is. I'm not so worried about who has it. I'm way more worried about where it is because that's when things can change quickly and we can get hurt. That to me is a really big change. That's really changing your priorities as a player, how you make decisions, how you execute. That's a big thing to change for your last game.
Absolutely. Looking ahead, do you feel like this team might adapt a specific style change or just be a sort of jack of all trades kind of team?
I think we're going to see them continue to be very possession focused. The one thing I'm going to be really watching for is, do we start using the midfield more, or are we really, really committed to the wide channels and kind of skipping the midfield a little bit? Why change something that's working? We're nitpicking. So much of it is working.
Yep.
You didn't concede in a knockout game, in a meaningful game. So I would think Hayes is probably very, very happy with how they're doing right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, no reason for her not to be happy as she kind of looks at herself in the reflection of the gold medal. Actually, I don't think the coaches get gold medals. So maybe she's just kind of, as her players are talking to her, she's seeing her reflection in the gold medal. I want to go back to the forwards and kind of who's going to come back. My apologies to Lynn Williams, live fact check on the show, 31 years of age. Sorry, I said you were around 33, Lynn. I would not take kindly to that myself. Sorry for adding those 2 years. You're so good and so experienced. That's why I did that, is the obvious reason.
It's her maturity level, obviously.
Yeah, totally. So thinking about some of those other players, though, who are going to come in, I have to keep reminding myself, and as a Seattle Reign watcher and now somebody who covers the team, I think back to the NWSL final, Midge Purce was a nightmare for the Reign's defense in that match. She suffered the unfortunate injury earlier this year, taking her out of the national team and out of the league for a while. As somebody living in Seattle, somebody who covers the Seattle Reign, I think about that NWSL final last season against Gotham FC, where Midge Purce was the MVP of the final. Gotham probably doesn't win that match without Midge Purce. Obviously, she suffered the unfortunate injury, but Purce is going to come back, and she can fit into, I think she's traditionally a right wing, but she can play on the left wing. She might be somebody who I think will immediately put herself back into contention for the team. As it stands right now, she's 28 years old. I think also Mia Fishel is rehabbing from her injury. I mean, she is a physically gifted, smart, tough player, obviously getting great coaching, continuing over at Chelsea Football Club in England. So, when we talk about like who is going to step up, and Bridie, I think you nailed it too when you said Sentinor can also fill into that forward room. I think your point stands that triple espresso, Belle Biv de goal, et cetera, that's the apex probably of the three forwards. But if you kind of start moving them around, and maybe you play Mia Fishel at 9 and Sophie Smith on the left and Rodman on the right, I think you might have some winning combinations there too. So it all goes to the flexibility, the adaptability. And when you played Mia Fishel up there, you could kind of play her like a Myra Ramirez, just like, hey, just go start bulldozing defenders up there.
Yeah, those are two really interesting names to me, because I think when I picture them coming in so differently. Yeah. Midge Purse, that 1v1 ability. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were talking about how, Rodman runs the right wing on her own. You could have Purse do that. It would be kind of a like for like sub. And we know Hayes likes to have, role players that fit a specific role. When I think about Mia Fishel, that's when I think, okay, well, who's playing that role right now? And I'm not sure we really have that big kind of like, I feel like this is a basketball term, but power forward.
Yeah.
So, okay. I love a good power forward. If it was up to me, every ball in the box would be a cross and we just try and get somebody on the end of it. It's not winning football, but I mean, I love watching it. So yeah, I mean, maybe if you want to bring Mia Fishel in, which hopefully she does because she's a great player, then you maybe have to start making a couple tweaks up front, because she's a very, very different player to what we got so far.
Abby Wambach believes that's winning football.
She knows a thing or two.
She does.
Hell yeah. Bridie, so USWNT next up, October 24th, a matchup against Iceland and all those dotiers that, like to get in there and mix it up and cause trouble. Is there anything specifically you're going to be looking for as maybe a new wrinkle, or I don't know, the ball starts rolling around? Where's the first place your eyes are going to go?
I think that back line might be challenged a little bit throughout the whole tournament. I mean, everybody's approach was kind of the same. Let's see if we can get balls in behind. These girls are really good defending in the box. We have to try and beat them vertically. And Iceland looked very, very good at beating people vertically. So I'm really interested to see that matchup, and if Germa has a day or if maybe she's a little challenged for the first time. I don't know. We'll see.
That's going to be really interesting with Iceland's kind of physical style. Like you mentioned, like the good size that they have. I'm gonna place, this is an easy bet, so I'd have to really double down on the amount I would bet. I'm gonna imagine that Emily Fox is going to be in a wrestling match through most of that game.
I could definitely see that. The one thing that gets me with her is like, how do you have the speed and the physicality combo? Going to Arsenal has done her some real good. You could see the British football throughout the tournament. It was great.
Yeah, she was definitely on my short list of players whose stock I think appreciated the most over that 17-day period. Bridie, did we miss anything super obvious? Any takes that you need to kind of unleash? Any last ones?
I don't know. I feel like our only thing is we're nitpicking here, and like, what are we nitpicking at? we're making more work for ourselves. I guess that's the nature of the game, right? Like we don't have anything to talk about unless we're looking for some things to work on and being forward thinking. But I just am so impressed with the players, the coaching. I imagine for a lot of people it's pretty shocking to see what happened at the Women's World Cup and then to see this Olympic result. I'm not entirely shocked because I think all the pieces were always there, but it's just such a testament to what high-level coaching can do and what that kind of investment in a team can do.
Oh, yeah. I think Grant and I were talking about it maybe in our gold medal match recap, that there are a lot of different age bands on this roster specifically. There's some like the teens and early 20s, then there's like those mid-20s I think kind of caps out at Haran, and then we've got a handful of 30 plus on the squad. I'm just expecting a lot of turnover.
Yeah, I was surprised when the roster came out, and this kind of shows my naivety and probably lack of understanding of real world coaching. But, there are a lot of older players. We've already corrected ourselves on that. But, we've had a lot of players with more experience on the roster, and that surprised me. I was kind of expecting Emma Hayes to go sort of a little bit heavy on the younger players and just consider this an investment opportunity and time to learn. But I think they showed if you're if you want to win, you have the players to do it. You could put together a team to do it. So I think that's going to be the question going forwards is like, how much do we look to the veterans for leadership and guidance, and how willing are we to take risks and just start investing in new players? And like, they're going to have to start conceding goals at some point to learn from them. So who are you willing to let get scored on and learn that lesson the hard way?
Yeah, that's a great point, is that you're not going to make it through any tournament without facing some adversity. And I would say, the 1-0, 1-0, 1-0 going to extra time versus Japan, I think that was the level of adversity that the USA faced in this Olympic tournament. There is zero chance that you make it through a World Cup without really kind of having your back up against it at some point. And we are picking nits, but I think the exciting part about this is that, Dino mentioned it, USA back on top. They leapfrog Spain. They're the number one country in the world in the women's FIFA rankings now. I think it sets up for just a gigantic target on USA's back going into, and we'll see how the rankings change over the next few years as we build up to the World Cup. You still have the Euros that are going to happen. But some of the discourse that I saw, I'm going to throw out a little bit of a wild card question here. Some of the discourse that I saw was, this is a majority NWSL lineup on the field for Team USA. And, there's always this kind of, I don't know if it's so much tribalism or whatever you want to call it, but there's a lot of puffing out of the chest from USA fans going, yeah, that's because our league is the best league, and we can dominate this sport because we do have the NWSL. How much stock do you put in? Okay, the majority of our players play in the best league. That's why we're the favorites to win.
Not that much, honestly. And I think one of the great things probably about this team was, you had a lot of different type of experience. You had some of that Champions League experience. You had two players that actually live in France and are probably feeling a little bit more comfortable and can help the team get comfortable. And then you had a bunch of NWSL players. And I think if you went in with just NWSL players, you're probably missing some of the context. If you leaned really heavy on the European side of things, then you're losing a lot of the chemistry that you would have. Not that they could field a full team of players playing in Europe, but they will be able to at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you saw some of that. That was a big, I know we don't talk about men's football too much, but I remember that being a thing with the U.S. men's national team. Like, they fielded a team earlier this year that they said, like, this is the first time the U.S. men's national team has had all players who play in international leagues. And, I have some level of bias or some level of bitterness against that side. They still stink, if you ask me. It doesn't matter. I mean, they don't play together, whatever. I digress. But basically what I'm saying is I'm with you. I don't hold a ton of stock in that. I think the NWSL is one of, at worst, the two elite leagues in the world. But I'm totally with you. It is nice to have, even if it's just a little bit of sprinkling in there, of like some players from D1F, some players from the WSL, obviously Emily Fox from Dino's Arsenal, as I see the cannon on his chest right now.
Let's go.
I think it's a benefit. It's always a benefit to have a little bit of diversity in just the style of football that your team can play.
Yeah, and you could really see it. Fox was very, very physical at times. There were some shoulder charges that I know would have been called in the NWSL that do not get called in the WSL. Yep. There are moments where Albert and Horan playing with their back turned, it just looks very NWSL the way they're doing that. So it's great. That variety of experiences really, I think, has made the team so much better.
All right. I know you guys are both also Team England enthusiasts or England supporters. But for the purposes of us three getting together, this is a Team USA podcast. Team USA, anything else we want to hit before we get out of here?
USA. There's nothing else to say.
Nice little rhyme scheme there. I know this pod had a little bit of a somber tone. Maybe Grant, I think you're right at the top. Probably a little bit of rust. We've been offline for, I don't know, feels like a year, to be honest, but it was only roughly about a week. I'm excited to get back to it. That leads me to my last question, Bridie. So obviously you've got a killer page, busy watching women's soccer. Anybody who's not a fan, head there immediately. You've got your YouTube, you've got your Patreon. Now that the Olympics are a wrap, though, what's next up for you? What's next up for the channel? Where does your focus shift to now?
Yeah, so I got two things I'm working on for YouTube specifically for my much-awaited return. I want to do a little kind of whiteboard tactic style breakdown of how the West was won, I suppose. Hayes, I think, has a really interesting way that she sets the team up in possession and in defense, and I think it'd be fun to kind of break down those two. And then the other thing for YouTube is I really want to start focusing on player studies. The player that I'm just really drawn to right now that I want to talk about is Haran. I just think there's so much noise in the media. I really like her as a player, so I'd like to try and do something and maybe prove out that maybe she didn't have as bad of a tournament as everybody thought.
I like it.
I love that. I think that's really great. And I thought the post-match press conference after the final, Emma Hayes kind of talking about what Lindsay Horan kind of allowed her to do as the incoming manager and Horan's role as a captain. I thought that it clearly meant a lot to Horan when Emma Hayes talked about it, but it just shows Emma Hayes, great with the tactics, great with, filling out the team sheet. She has a player management aspect to her as well. She's just one of the elite managers in the world. And so I just look forward to kind of her continuing to set up the team. And I look forward to continue to watching you, the elite tactical breaker downer on the internet. People, patreon.com/busywatchingwomen's-soccer. It's easy to find. You can even Google Patreon Busy Watching Women's Soccer. You'll find it. It'll pop up. You should watch it immediately.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes. Good content for everywhere in the works.
Very excited. All right, team. Much like the U.S. Women's National Team, I think we did it. This has been another episode of Into the Channel. Sincere thank you to everyone who watches, listens, follows, likes, subscribes, just plain hangs out with the squad. And remember to like if you liked, subscribe or follow Into the Channel, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Leave us a review over your favorite podcast app. Links to all of our socials in the show notes of this episode. Big thank you to our special guest making her second appearance on the show. And a big thank you as well to my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel, for shaking off the rust, getting back into mid-season form. I appreciate you, bro.
Likewise, buddy. Thank you again to Bridie O'Toole from Busy Watching Women's Soccer. Thank you to everybody else for checking out the show. The comments were great throughout the Olympic tournament. We definitely took notice of all the comments, all the tactical breakdown in just our YouTube comments. We thought you guys were very mindful. We noticed when you guys had a little bit of disagreements in there, you were still very polite, very demure. So we appreciate all that. And we're going to be coming back. I don't know. Somebody told me to say those things. I don't really know what any of that means. I'm just talking at this point. But let me just say, we are going to be back. Hopefully we'll be talking about Brazil in the coming days here. And we will also be talking about this busy transfer window in global women's football. So please keep it locked for that. Thank you all again for watching, and we will see you very soon.